lab. We have a special guest tonight, and just getting your head around who is our guest tonight, the person who has actually created, was among the creators of the SIGs and was there for more than 30 years and has led the storytelling search and investigations for more than 3 decades. And it's a huge pleasure. I welcome Kendall Haven. And Kendall is a huge expert. If you think about storytelling, you probably know him, or his amazing books, Story Proof or Story Proof, and Story Smart. Yeah, I just got it out. And Kendall is about to give us his lab on the topic of your brain on story, using the science of story to better persuade, inspire, influence, and teach. Kendall, it's great to have you here. It's all yours, and we are all yours.
Wow, great. But I need to be able to take over on the screen. So
of course, we are about to give you the
share.
Yeah, I did give you host privileges just now.
So if I do that, and
we can now see the screen.
Come up to that and launch. Can you all see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can.
Okay, it worked. We're on. Welcome to all of you. So in the few minutes, you know, I started trying to compress about 45, 50 hours worth of material into 24, 25 minutes, and then decided I really can't do that. But here's what I do want to do, though. I want to make sure that you carry away some of the highlights that have come out of the science research that we've been conducting into the science of story. The gist of it is this: always, and I mean for a couple of millennia, people have been looking at stories and saying, why do they work? Why are they? When I joined NSM, which is then NAPS, back in 1981, the question, and because I was the first person to join with a doctorate in science, I got dumped in charge of doing science research. And the question was, why do people listen to stories? Why do we remember stories? Why do we care about stories? And there was really all the research that had ever been done looked at the stories themselves. Now, in the last 15 years, partly because some federal agencies have been willing to pony up a bunch of money, partly because technology advanced, what we've been able to do is flip it around and not look at the stories, but look at the brain of the receiver and say, how does the human brain make sense of incoming information? How do we process it? How do we create meaning from it? How do we make sense out of it? And what does the pathway look like between sensory organs, eyes and ears mostly, and conscious mind? And what does that how does that relate to story? What's come out of all of that have been some incredibly simple but powerful tools and bits of information that you all can use and should be using with organizations. I know I work with a lot of organizations. Cigna Insurance is a great example that comes to mind. And I'll do this real quick because I don't want to get too sidetracked. It was about 3 or 4 years ago. They had to do a complete flip. No, it's 3 years ago. Complete flip in their corporate position relative to all of their workers. They had been putting
Kendall, give us just a moment. I'm going to cut this little piece so the recording is clean. Jules, can we make sure that we mute the participants that are making this excessive noise, because I don't have this ability from my PC. Can you check it?
Kendall, if you can mute on your end, everybody, I think you have it. And if everybody independently would just mute themselves, I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, and we'll proceed from this point.
All right, so Cigna. They had to create a whole new story for all of the hundreds of thousands of people working at Cigna, which is a complete reversal of the story they had been pushing and saying was the only way for them to succeed for about 8 months. In Cigna, there's a group of 6 that are the top people. Under them, there's a group they call the group of 150. That's the second tier down. Those are the people I was going to be working with. The people who are, but you don't just go in and do a workshop at a big corporation like that. There have to be 3 planning meetings to plan it all out and make sure it's all approved. And that was being done by people 1 more level down who looked at the people who were the 150s as if they were semi-gods. And I was told in one of those meetings, and this is kind of the attitude that a lot of companies have on story. Listen, all you have to do is give them an example, one example of a story that didn't work and one example of a story that did, and they're smart people, they'll take it from there. I said, no, they won't. That's not the way stories work. They said, absolutely, and forced me to give them those examples, and it was an absolutely total failure. That sort of attitude that, oh yeah, story's simple, we got that, just give us one example, is endemic across organizations. And it's nice to have some real counters to that you can back up, that you can say, yeah, we can prove it. We already have proved it. So that's what I want to go through today. And I want to start, if I could, with just one other little short story. It happened on September 26th, 2002. 2 days after
Excuse me. We need to mute. That noise is horrendous. Somebody is making some horrendous noise on here. It is blocking out everything you're trying to say. And it's very distracting to your whole presentation, Kendall. I'm sorry, but he has to be blocked, muted. Whoever this is making all this damn noise.
I think it's the phone. I think it's the person on the phone. Who's
Okay.
ever calling from 773, because everyone else is muted.
Okay.
So whomever is on the phone might be moving their phone around. I think that might be what's going on.
Okay. Anything we can do about that?
Other than them, if they can settle in. I mean, sometimes I think they move it around a lot. So who's ever on 773, if you can just settle in and maybe just listen, that would be very helpful, I think, to all of us.
Yeah, and stop moving it around. It's crazy noise. Thank you.
Kendall can mute it. Kendall.
Okay.
Okay. So on my 55th birthday, and I've been telling stories full time by this time for close to 15, 16 years. It suddenly, for the first time in my life, hit me that I was 55 and I was heading for old age, and it occurred to me that I was going to fight against it. And I had absolutely no interest in getting older or being associated with being old because, I was just a young punk storyteller. So with that attitude, I had actually gone to the town of Maricopa, California, small little gold rush town up in the mountains. I was going to spend a day working at the high school. I had stayed in a little local motel the night before. I like breakfast, so I was supposed to be at the high school at 7:40. I checked out of my motel really, at 6:15, which meant that you just slide your key through a slot in the door because no one comes into the office there till 8. And after I had dumped out my key so I couldn't get back into the room, I realized that there are only 2 places in town that had breakfast, and neither one opened till 7. So I had 45 minutes to kill before I could go get a quick breakfast. The only place that was open was a Burger King. I walked into the Burger King, up to the counter, and there was a young woman there. If you had told me she was 13 years old, I would have believed it, but I'm sure she was actually older than that. And I said, hi, one small coffee, black. She smiled, big customer service smile, and pointed at the sign on the wall next to her and said, senior citizen discount? And the sign, I looked over at it, said, coffee, normally $1.05, it was 25 cents a cup if you were a senior citizen, quote, 65 and older. And I said to her, gee, that's a great deal, but I got to tell you, I'm nowhere near that old. She smiled, a great big customer service smile, and said back to me, this is a quote, oh, that's okay. You look plenty old enough to me. That's the incident. There are 2 stories that walk away from that. I happened to find out about hers. Her story was That month, she applied for for Employee of the Month and used that interaction and her demonstration of superior customer service as one of the justifications for being Employee of the Month. I walked away from that having flopped my quarter down, snatched up my coffee. I was pissed. I had just been mortally wounded and insulted. I boycotted Burger King for a decade. Two versions of the same incident, two stories, walked away from that incident. The question is, which one matters? And the answer is, there's only one of them that matters, and that's the one, and that's not hers, that's mine. Organizations all the time tell stories that have, and there's some research on this, that have the exact opposite effect that they are after. So it's not for your organizations, for you all, for any group, any company. It's not did they say what they wanted to say, which is what they always use as the marker. It's did they make their target audience hear what you needed for them to hear, which is a totally different question. And now means instead of being oriented towards us, the company, and what we want to say, you have to be audience oriented and say, how do I adjust what I do to make them hear what I need for them to hear? So now a couple of just headlines, because again, this is a real quickie. Things we have been able to prove. This is using fMRI and EEG labs. It's using a lot of audience testing. It's using other lab techniques. Headlines. One, the human brain, and this is global, the human brain is hardwired to make sense of and create meaning from incoming information in very specific story terms. A company can say, I'm not telling stories, it doesn't matter. So don't tell me about story because I don't tell stories. No, wrong. The correct statement is, it doesn't matter if you think you're telling a story, your audiences will automatically, at a subconscious level, make sense of them and hear them in story terms. The only question is whether you want to leave the interpretation of that story up to them, or if you want to take control of the story that they create on your own, which of course you do. Second, so they're going to hear it in story terms whether you tell it that way or not. In that sense, when I think about story, it's not the little incidents, those classes, stories. When we talk about story, what we're really talking about is the brain-based pattern that defines how human brains make sense of incoming information. So it becomes a process. Story is a process, it's a planning tool. And your job is then to lead an organization through that process so they can successfully create stories that have the effect they want them to have. Second, I'm going to demo this in a second, turn information into story before it reaches the conscious mind, not after. It happens automatically, subconsciously in the lower back part of the brain, in the same set of processes where, for example,
okay, you can go now.
You turn information from that comes down your optic nerve from just a dot pattern. It goes down the optic nerve back into letters, back into words. At that same time, you're processing information by trying to figure out how does it make sense to you, and how does it have meaning to you. You do those in story terms before it ever gets to your conscious mind. What gets to your conscious mind then, and in process of doing that, these are just a few of the very common changes that we make to that incoming information. I know what I'm doing wrong. I'm going to do it this way. You'll hear better. At a subconscious level, so you don't even know you're doing it, right? And notice that includes completely reversing the information. Then, so a summary of this whole process, this thing that we're now calling the neural story net. It lies between the external world, between the external world and the mind. It automatically distorts incoming information in order to make it make sense. So the story that they see and hear isn't necessarily the story you provided. And we can also prove this using effective story structure. The elements of effective story structure minimizes that distortion. That's what reaches the conscious mind. It's not what you provided. It is a self-created story-based version of your source material, altered from that original in order to make it make sense to that individual. That's the version that can create influence. And that's the version you want to control. And that's what story science is all about. A quick demo, just so you can see your mind jump into story action. I'm going to show you, this is so much more fun to do if we're in a group, so we can all sit around the table and share versions of it, but it'll still work good. Two lines. Person number one says, "Where's John?" Person number two says, "Well, I didn't want to say anything, but I saw a green VW parked in front of Carol's." Again, person number one, "Where's John?" Person number two, "I didn't want to say anything, but I saw a green VW parked in front of Carol's." Stop, take a moment and think about the first thing that flashes through your mind. What is the relationship between the four human beings mentioned? Person number one, who speaks; person number two, who speaks; John, who's spoken about; Carol, who's spoken about; and more importantly, what's going on here? And as you rumble through the thoughts that go into your mind, and this is what we would have a lot of fun sharing around the table, but we're not going to break into little groups and do it here. Was your first thought, nope, can't possibly answer either question because he didn't give me enough information? In fact, I didn't. Everything that you created, everything that flashed through your mind was a product of your neural story net. I want to show you a few of the assumptions you had to make in order to be able to make any sense of that at all in a moment. First, I want to show you one more demo. Imagine yourself standing in a corner. I don't care what the event is, picture your own event, picture your own setting, but you're standing somewhere kind of in a corner and you hear this conversation happen near you. Person number one says, "Hi, John." Person number two says, "Shh, I'm not here. You never saw me? I'm not here." Person number one says, "Oh, it's okay. Carol's gone home." Now, if you heard that, you would know how to make perfect sense out of it, right? Most of you, I assume, would say person number two is John. And what John is really saying is, keep it quiet. There are people I don't want to bump into today. And person number one, understanding the situation, says, "That's okay, you wimp. Carol's gone home. You don't have to hide." Right? That's not what it says. In order to make it make sense to you, you had to factually, completely reverse the factual information statements that person number two said, every one of them. Now here, it's for fun. It happens all the time with core content material. If you take it literally, all you can conclude is poor person number two has lost all touch with reality because person number two is here. And you, person number one, not only have seen him, you're looking at him right now. But because that didn't make sense to your neural story net, that thought that might be the situation never got to your conscious mind. It was eliminated by your neural story net. Go back to here, and I bet most of you linked John with a green VW. It doesn't say that. If you take it literally, all you can assume is that poor person number two either didn't hear the question or also has lost all touch with reality because they were asked about a person, John, and are talking about a car. There is no connection between them until you assume there is, which you did because it's the only way to make it make sense. There are a couple of other those kind of core level assumptions that you made, like that person number one and person number two are physically co-located and that person number two is actually answering person number one. Doesn't necessarily say that, but you assume it because it doesn't make sense to you otherwise. It's the concept. We do that all the time. We do it with core information so that I think this is the source of most miscommunication that happens. And the problem is the receiver thinks that what reaches their conscious mind is an accurate representation of what the other person provided. One more little demo. 3 sentences. He went to the store. Fred died. Sharon went hungry and wept. Can't you feel yourself linking those together into a story? It's like you can't stop yourself. You start to say, oh, and I bet most of you have already assumed that he who went to the store is actually Fred. Now you're trying to think, okay, he went to the store. Why did he die? Blah, blah, blah. We can go into that if we had more time to play. But notice that already you violated one of the laws of English. Law of English, a pronoun may not refer to a noun that, must refer to a noun that precedes it, not one that follows it. And you don't care. When the laws of English come up against this make sense mandate, the mandate to make sense out of incoming information, laws of physics don't stand a chance. This is an incredibly powerful force that you need to accommodate and your clients need to accommodate and deal with. It's all target audience based whenever they want to communicate. Now, we come to the 2 key questions. Control these 2, you control communication. If you can control how the human brain of your target audience makes sense out of what you provide, be it in video, be it a blog that they're reading, be it something you say, you control how they make sense out of it. And that makes sense version that gets to their conscious mind is the only version that has a chance to exert influence. Influence being changing attitudes, beliefs, values, and/or knowledge in order to change behavior. That's influence. Anytime you communicate, that's what you're trying to do. It's all based on the meaning that the individual makes from that self-created version. So I now have developed, and I'm now at the point where I have explicit quantitative algorithms and models for both of those processes and for all of the variables that come out of a text, out of source material, that influence those 2 processes. And that's the last 4 or 5 years worth of research. No, it isn't published yet. I'm trying to decide how I want to get it out. But it now exists. And I want to jump all the way to the very end of the process to show you one little tool that comes out of the end of it called story reframing. And this is part of controlling how someone makes sense of your material. And this is a way to change or control key story elements so you completely, of the story that you tell, so you completely change the way an audience receives the messaging that you want to get across. And it's always the messaging that you want to get across, right? I was asked, this is with Department of Defense funding, to go into the labs and decide which of all of the elements of the structural elements of story control influence, how someone creates meaning from material. And we found out it really boils down to a couple of questions that drive it all. First one is, who's this story about for me? A story is always created about a main character. Often, that's not the character that you, the target audience member, care about. So you look at the story differently than you would if you cared most for the main character. And then the question is, how bad is the ending of the story for that character that I care about, and who do I blame for it? And then after doing more research, we found we had to add in, it's not so much just who I blame for it, because often we think we should blame the antagonist in the story, but often people don't. The person they blame is the person they think should have fixed it. And so we come to this new character position that really doesn't show up in any of the books, any of the existing models. It is the person who has the power to control how a story ends, how a story comes out. And they get blamed if they don't exercise that power. And if they do and make it come out the way that the audience thinks it should, that's the character that gets the credit, not necessarily the main character the story's about. So when we look at that in model terms, what we have is a main character who the story is about has a goal. Goal being something tangible, real, physical that they are after. Peace is not a goal because we don't know what it looks like. It's not tangible enough. Averting hunger is not a goal because we don't know what it looks like. Those are actually motives. Motives are the values, beliefs, attitudes, problems, gripes that lie behind a specific tangible goal that we're going to use for that is what drives this story. The antagonist is the single.
Excuse me for interrupting. Would you please repeat what you just said? Your definition of motive, please.
Motive is the information that makes a goal important to the character and relevant to the audience. If I'm going to define it. Motive typically are the values, beliefs, attitudes, gripes, problems, immediate concerns of a character. The more we research it, the more we find that motives are critically important, grossly underrated in the way we look at stories. If I want you to care about a character, the best way to do it is to ensure what we're now calling motive match. If you believe that the motives of a character are consistent with your own, you will automatically empathize with and start to identify with that character and view the story through that character's eyes. In a 10, 12-minute story in the lab, if I change one sentence that flips motive, I can completely flip the way that an audience, when we're wiring them up and watching their brains, the way that they react to and relate to a character, just by controlling motive. It's an amazingly powerful tool. It's not what you're after, it's why you're after it. Goal, again, is defined as what a character wants or needs physically to do or get in a story. The antagonist is then the embodiment of the biggest single obstacle that stands between character and goal. An antagonist does not have to be a character, especially for corporate stories, organizational stories. An antagonist can be hunger, it can be prejudice, it can be a storm, it can be climate change, it can be anything. It is the more your target audience is able to visualize that antagonist. That's why climate change is such a poor example of an antagonist, because it looks a little different to everybody. The more we can visualize it, the better. Climax for any story, and people talk about climax all the time, the one and only practical definition for a climax, you can check it for any story, and it always is true. A climax is that moment in the story when the main character, for the last time in this story, confronts the antagonist. After that confrontation, either the main character wins and gets to their goal, or the main character loses and gives up on the goal forever. That's the climax moment. And it is this climax character, this kind of a hero is an example of a climax character, but a hero is almost always also the main character. A climax character doesn't have to be someone that's going to make the climax come out well for the main character. Just who has the power. This is the power position. Control this position, and you control the way your audiences view the whole story. Resolution then is two things. Factual statement. Does the main character achieve their goal, yes or no? And how do they feel about it? And what comes out of that is this residual resolution emotion. Down over here. The residual resolution emotion. And that's the way the audience is left feeling just after the story is over. And this becomes an incredibly powerful force in determining the effect of the story on the individual person. Okay, those now, what does reframing look like using those stories? And again, we're jumping all around, but I just wanted to show an example of what this all looks like. I'll give you two. One is a public sector and one is private. The Maricopa County Assessor, Phoenix, Arizona. The county has like 15 million parcels in it. That's what he told me. He was running for re-election. He had been elected originally on a pledge to update the office, update the assessor's office and make it more user-friendly, blah, 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 and hadn't done a thing until he was running for re-election. And he had finally gotten a grant from the state of Arizona to completely redo and upgrade all of the computer systems and the processes and the way that people could come in and interact, retrieve information. He also got a fleet of planes so that every year his planes would fly over every parcel in the county and take an aerial photograph of it that they would use to update the assessment instead of just those on the street drive-bys where someone would drive by and from the street take a picture of the property. And they were doing that about once every 4 years. And then he also got a fleet of drones. So if anyone challenged an assessment, instead of it taking 2 years to get resolved in court, within 1 hour of you filing a challenge, he would have a drone over that property capable of taking photographs accurate to within a 1/16 of an inch that would take measurements of all exterior, interior spaces and all walls and structures on the property, have that back processed in 1 more hour. So in 2 hours, you would have a settlement. And he started to run for election and thought everyone would love it. And he started talking to business groups and developer groups and construction groups, homeowner groups, and he got booed. And his numbers in the polls started to tank. And he got death threats. And that's when he called me and said, I don't get it, what's going on? It's the Burger King story. The question was, what was the story that he thought he was telling? And what's the story that people heard? Okay, here's the story that he thought he was telling. He wanted to make it, oh, I'm going too fast. He wanted to make it about himself because he was the one running for election. First cue, if your client companies, organizations want to put themselves as main characters, they're in trouble because a significant portion of their audience will automatically flip them from main character to antagonist. I'll show you what it looks like. So his goal, of course, was to accurately assess property. Why? That's his mandate, his job. And his antagonist has always been a lack of tools. This new technology from the grant let him do it. So this becomes the climax character that would let him successfully do his job. Everyone's supposed to be happy. And that was sort of his takeaway line. We'll be able to do our job better with new technology. Here's what the target audiences heard when I surveyed them. First, they didn't care about the assessor. They were all property owners. So what do they care about? I went the wrong way. They cared about property owners, right? Because that's who they were. Mention the assessor, and any property owner, when you talk about a goal, says, my goal is to minimize the assessed value of my property. Why? Their basic driving motive is I want to pay less tax. Who's the enemy? The assessor. So in the mind of his target audiences, because he told the story about himself and they were looking at a different character, he got flipped into the role of antagonist. So who's in the mind of the property owners, who then really is the climax character, the one that gets away, that wins, that can control the process? Someone who cheats, who develops, adds on a room, puts on a pergola, doesn't get a permit and doesn't get caught. And what the assessor was saying is he was going to catch all of those cheaters. So what that meant was that the property owner had no positive outcome to see in this story. And so they were angry, they were outraged. That's when he started to get the death threats. And this is what they heard. I said, what we need to, your message is going to stay the same. It's about the new technology, it's about what you're doing. We need to change the story so they hear the message the way you want to. Reframing. We're going to reframe the story. First, to look at who's the main character that you really want to use in the story. I said, you'll never get them to care about you. So you have to care about them. All right. Then you say, what goal would work well for this story? And I said, the assessor really doesn't say how much tax is going to get created. That happens from the Board of Supervisors. He just spreads it out according to property values, which means that if someone cheats, everyone else who's an honest citizen pays part of their taxes. And so I said, what you want to say is, you don't want to pay someone else's taxes, do you? From the day I started working with him, that was his opening line on every talk he did from that day on. And of course, the property owner has the same motive, reduce their overall taxes. Well, they don't want to pay someone else's taxes, they want to pay their own. And as soon as you accept this as a goal, what it does is flip the cheater into the role of antagonist, and the assessor and his new technology into the role of climax character, which is where you want to be, where you want your clients to be, or their programs, or the services that they provide, or the products that they create, right? And so by flipping it, so it's now all about fairness, what he did, he got himself reelected. Same message. It's about the technology. It's about how it changes the office. But by reframing the story, it changes the way that his target audience hears it. So what are you looking at is changing main character, changing goals, changing motives, so that you control who your target audience relates to and who they empathize with and how they view the information that you want to provide. One more demo. I want to do a corporate one. ARAMCO, a Saudi oil company, 3.5 years ago, they first decided they wanted to go public, sell some of their stock. And so the PR people in Riyadh put out the most amazing 4-slide public statement. Now, ARAMCO started in the 30s as a US company, and its headquarters were in New York until 1970 something, when Saudi Arabia took it over. They still have a big office in New York, and they have a huge office in Houston where they do most of their contracting and a lot of their hiring. And because they still have a presence in the US, and because they have interest in some refineries in Texas, they're very concerned with the political whims and flows in the US. I work with their Washington office. And so this thing coming out of Riyadh said, our goal is to dominate the world because we own the most oil, which is true. And so don't trust any other oil company, because we're the only one who can really guarantee stability in the international oil market and deliver oil anywhere to anyone. And the people in the Washington office knew that was going to go over like a lead balloon here in this country. And so when we analyzed it, the people they cared about, US decision makers and businesses, mostly decision makers like congressmen and the states of Texas and Louisiana, mostly. When it comes up, the goal of those people, because they think that their constituents like this, is to stop big foreign oil, because we want to protect American jobs and environment. So ARAMCO becomes the antagonist. Again, by telling the story about themselves, they left themselves wide open to be flipped to the role of antagonist. And so anti-oil policies and actions become the climax character. We had to flip the story. First question, I had to reframe the story in order to get that story across, that they have a lot of oil. They can stabilize any market. They can provide it anywhere. You want energy, they can provide it. So I said, if that's the market, these are the people that ARAMCO in the US cares about. Who do they care about? Voters. So we're going to do the story about individuals. And this is an energy story, and life anymore is very energy intensive. Healthy food is energy intensive. Healthcare is energy intensive. Communication, transportation, mobility, safe living, comfortable living, they're all energy intensive. So let's take the goal of the individual is to get the energy that they need. Why? Because they want to protect their family, have good health, food, shelter, blah, 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 blah. As soon as you go to that as a main character, that as a goal, anyone who restricts the flow of energy suddenly looks like the antagonist. So ARAMCO could step in the role of climax character, and actually they were able, well, they got, as soon as that piece came out from Riyadh, ARAMCO were blocked out of meetings, energy policy meetings, and were not even allowed to attend in Texas, in Washington, in Georgia, and a couple of other states. As soon as they, in the US, flipped the story this way, they got their seat back at the table. Now, they will never be everybody's favorite corporation, but just by reframing the story, they were able to get their message across in a sympathetic way. That's reframing. Now, and I wanted to stop there because I've already gone over the time I wanted to do, and I'll skip designing change stories. Golly gee whiz. Any questions, comments, rebuttals? Anyone want to jump in and say, hold on there? That's not the way I see it.
Yeah, Kendall, thank you so much for an amazing piece of understanding of how it all works. And yeah, we're all yours for the 1 or 2 questions. Just in case we go over the time, can you give us the links to where to find you, just in case we get into this hot discussion?
It's the easiest is just Kendall at kendallhaven.com.
Perfect.
And you
I'm
go
going
to
to-
kendallhaven.com. You know, there's a list for the books and all, but just Kendall at kendallhaven.com. And certainly anyone who wants to, again, we jumped over huge hunks of things. So that I wanted to show the reframing because it is such a powerful technique and it's so easy to use as soon as you recognize those pieces and start to look for them in the stories that your organizations want to put out. Just instinctively, all organizations are so focused on where they are and what they need to do that it's very difficult for them to get their head out of their own perspective and start to think, who's my target audience? What do they need? What's important to them? How do I get them to get excited about, from their viewpoint, what would make them excited about what I have, about my programs, about my information? But it makes a huge difference in the effectiveness of the stories.
It sure does. So guys, if anyone has any questions, you may write to the chat or be bold and jump into the discussion, and we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Kendall,
I put my hand up and I'd like to ask Kendall a question.
Kevin, I see you. Team, go for it.
Thank you. Kendall, I wonder if you can give us an example of an effective use of story in the context of the 2020 presidential elections in the United States, or the 2020 response to the global pandemic, where a leader has been effective in either framing or reframing the story of that response to this global crisis.
Well, I'll stay local because that's the ones I watch the most. In March, our governor here in California, Governor Gavin Newsom, put out the order that we all had to wear masks and said it was about safety, and it was it was about slowing the spread, flattening the curve, which was the big term back then, which I think was really poorly designed because it's not actually quite statistically correct. And because it made it an order, it sort of worked for a while, but as soon as they began to relax the rules, as you've seen in the last month, California just skyrocketed. And all of a sudden, the change is, do you want your kids to be able to go to school? Do you want your business to stay open? Do you want the businesses you use to stay open? Do you want your job to still exist? If you do, wear a mask. and it's a flip from the state position, flattening the curve and slowing the spread, to flipping the story. So now we're talking about the conclusion, the same: wear a mask. Looking at what are the motives and the goals of the individual person in the target audience. So that's a COVID-19 example.
Thank you.
In the political realm, what we find, and this is I don't know, I hope it's not really because he understands and knows this and has learned it. I think it's just something he stumbled into. But the one thing that Trump is very good at, when you hear a story, this is one of the tests that I did, I've done now with up to about 1,000 people going through it, and a number of different stories. I'll bring a person in, I'll give them the first sentence of a story, only the first sentence. And then say, okay, what's the story about? Where's it going? Who's the main character? Why do you say that? What is that character after? A lot of times the information is not in that first sentence. And yet, amazingly, most times people think they have a real good idea of exactly where the story is going to go, where they want it to go, what the story is about, who the story is about. And I started looking at, so every time they answer, I make them go back to specific words in that sentence and say, why'd you answer that way? Then I'll give them the second sentence and re-quiz them. So I have to use short stories, as you can imagine, because after every sentence, they're going to get re-quizzed on exactly what the story and what changed it. So I'm looking at a very microscopic level, the bits of information that control how people make sense of this story as it begins to unfold. The things that you're looking for about a character most is who's the character and a dominant attitude. And you'll use that dominant attitude. He's kind, he's a liar, he's a cheat, he's spunny. You'll use that dominant attitude as a surrogate for the whole host of values that would identify sort of the profile of who that person is and how they then compare to your own profile of who you think you are. And what I find is once you establish that linkage, you don't ever change it, even if new. So if I have a story and I say in the beginning, John was a liar, and through the whole story, he always tells the truth. At the end of the story, people were still saying, yeah, he told the truth, but he's a liar. Once that is established, and unfortunately, Trump has gotten onto this pattern of linking character to a dominant character trait. And then it sticks and it becomes the defining element in the conversation. Is Hillary a liar? Is so and so is sleepy Joe? Well, all of a sudden, then everybody on both sides of the discussion sort of has to frame it from that viewpoint. So there's an example of story-based thinking that shows up, and you ain't seen nothing yet, I think, for how it's going to be used in the coming months. That tendency that will be used a lot to define and shape and curtail the options of the Democrats and Biden, because Trump happens to be exceptionally good at doing it. And it's all story-based. It's looking for that character and a dominant trait, which is what we're able to show people are desperately groping for as a story begins.
It's huge. Kendall, thank you for clarifying. Team, I hope that answers your question.
Yes,
And,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Kevin, I saw your hand going up, and
Yeah.
we still have two
And-
small questions in the chat, but Kevin, go for it. We have like
Great.
3-4 minutes.
Great to see your face, Kevin.
Good to
Too
see
long
you.
since I have seen it.
Good to see you, Kendall. And I so appreciate your work, as you know. My thought is that, you know, we have this narrative arc, which can be artificial. I mean, not what you're presenting, exposition, and it can change. I'm asking, how is tension or conflict a directional cue for you when you're doing your deep listening?
Absolutely.
Of everything?
Absolutely. That's great. The old saying, as goes tension, so goes attention, is absolutely true. And so what we find is that the initial tension controls engagement. Engagement is the gateway to influence. And while technically speaking, risk and danger are the ones that control most how tension goes at any given moment in the story. It's not action, it's not, but the perception by the audience of risk and danger, risk being the likelihood something's about to go wrong, danger being what would go wrong. It's the combination of those two, and mathematically, if you multiply those together, you get a measure for, we'll call excitement. And in EEG labs, we can track that measure of excitement, which is, again, the mathematical multiplication of risk times danger, and it tracks exactly with the neural measures for excitement. I think another way to measure it that I'm just in the last year and a half have really turned on to, that measures the same thing from a different perspective. At any given moment, tension can be measured by the difference between the target audience's expectations for where the story is going and their desire for where the story should go. The greater that difference, the greater the tension. And that's a measure that allows for individual differences between target audience members. Looking at risk and danger, is looking at the story. So technically, then that's the same for everybody, right? Because you're looking at the story and it's the same story they get. But looking at audience expectation and audience desire can be individualized to a person. It also gives you cues to use. Foreshadowing, for example, becomes a primary tool for controlling expectation. The more I foreshadow, I lead the audience to expect that we're going a certain direction, a certain place. Well, if I want to increase tension, I can use foreshadowing to make them think it's going farther away from their desired ending. Okay. Their desired ending is more a function of the target audience themselves. Their what they, their values, they're based on their values, their issues, their concerns, their culture, right? So that isn't affected as much by the story. It's affected some based on their analysis of the characters and the worthiness, in fact, of the central characters. But expectations of the audience is very variable. So I'm starting to think that that's a more practical concept for tension. And absolutely, tension controls engagement through the story. And engagement controls your ability to influence.
Thank you, Kendall. Appreciate it.
Amazing answer. Kendall, two short questions from the chat. First from RD, just to clarify the 4 questions to reframe accurately. Who is my target audience? Who do they need? What do they need? What's important to them? And what in my presentation speaks to that? Anything to add or delete from that list, or it's accurate?
Yeah, target audience. Really what you're looking for in your target audience is how are they going to evaluate the characters in my story? And so what you're looking for are what are the core values, beliefs, attitudes in that target audience. And those are usually cultural. So you can look for some cultural shifts, societal shifts there. And then ongoing issues, problems, those concerns that dominate their thinking at this time, if they are at all relevant to the topic of the story. So if you can understand your audience at that level, really what you're looking for is their motives, their total set of motives and drives. What drives them? What makes them act the way they act? You can, from that one bit of information, from that set of pieces of information, you can pretty well then go into any story analysis and say, how's that particular audience going to respond to this story? And you know, if you want to do the numerical calculations, come up with a number for how likely it is that this story is going to exert some significant influence over them, and also identify how they'll relate to the characters, how they'll relate to the situations in the story.
Great, thank you. Again, the layer under the layer. Thank you. And the question I would love to ask myself, but Pete went before me in the chat, and I think our participants would love to hear it. You have two books that I've already mentioned, Story Proof and Story Smart. And Pete asks, which of these books is going for the design, the creation of this, the structure of this story.
Story
so
Smart.
like designing change stories, yeah.
Of those two, Story Smart, and of course the caveat is Story Smart came out in 2000. I wrote it in 2014, so that's now, you know, gone 5.5, 6 years ago, and I have outlined what would be then the third book in that series, which would just be to lay out all of the algorithms and all of the numbers and then what it does is identify every element for how a target audience would relate to theme, how they'd relate to characters, and provide all the tools for applying all of it. And I was going to put it out as a book and got stopped because now 2 people are approaching me wanting to do it as an app. And so in trying hard to convince me that nobody reads books, but everyone uses apps. And if I want to spread it out to the marketplace, that apps are doing it as an app is a lot better idea. So I'm sort of on hold trying to figure out what to do with that. But Story Smart, of those 2 books, Story Proof is looking at what is the background research that existed, culling in from 15, 16 different fields of science to say, we're looking at how the brain tries to make sense out of things. What do we know? And then Story Smart is sort of taking off from there and saying, oh, if that's what we know, then what does it look like when you try to use it in a practical sense, and build stories from it?
Got it. Thank you so much. And we all will be waiting to get an idea if you have an app or a book for us to enjoy in this series. So
I'll be waiting too. If it's going to be an app, you know, I'm not the one who's going to write it.
Well,
a book I know how to write. An app, no, someone else has to do that.
Well, we wish you luck in any of these stories then people are writing. Actually, do both, and I can't agree more.
And then I agree too. It becomes a copyright question and a trademark. You know, it becomes then a legal question for what rights go with which of those 2 entities.
Yeah,
that becomes the hassle.
We hope it all clarifies for you, and we all get to enjoy some more of your thoughts and the practices you bring. So Kendall, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's been a pleasure, really. And you know, you all guys can write to the chat and express your thank yous to Kendall right now. So just give your appreciation to whatever you found the most
Thank you.
insightful.
Well, thank you to all of you for tuning in and spending some time with me, especially Kevin. I'm glad that you were one of the first ones to come in, so that your picture is, you know, up in the 5 or so that show up on my screen. Always great to. It's been way too long since we have checked in with each other. And for all of you, thank you. And certainly, if any questions, please feel free to email me and demand answers if if something doesn't sound right to you, because the whole idea of doing this kind of a talk is to make sure that it sounds right to you. Also, you all will be excited and use the information.
Great, thank you so much. And for all of you guys, one more thing before we go, and while I'll do this announcement, Kendall, can you please pass over the rights back to Jules, so we can end the session?
Maybe. I kind of like having power, but all right, for you, I'll do it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. And to wrap it up, if you liked what we're doing today, despite watching and recording and being with us live, stay tuned for our next Story Lab on the 27th of August at 12 p.m. And from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. EST, we're going to have Jay Golden from the Retellable, and he has the book of the same name, Retellable. He's going to tell us about how we can influence the world through finding a story that first influences ourselves. So it's a reflective story of someone who transferred from digital storytelling to really digging into transformation in one human being that creates transformation in others. So 27th of August, 12 p.m., we are going to make an announcement. So just stay in touch. And that's not all. We are doing a lessons learned story sharing of the NSN. It's going to be on the website, and we don't have a specified date, but it's going to be up soon. So thank you all for joining us today. And I guess we will see each other in the next TL Lab. So cheers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kendall, I need
Yes.
to give a recording privilege. It's when I hand you over, just also not just hand it over to me, but give me recording privilege back to me. Thank you.
I'm not, and how do I do that?
I'm not sure. This has been a
Let
strange
me look.
thing.
Pause, stop recording. I have a button here that says pause, stop recording. If I hit,
No, don't do
That's when
that.
I have
It'll stay on you. You got to give me.
yeah. How do I, well, let me see if let me try something and see if this works.
Okay.
End meeting for all, leave meeting.
Don't do that
No,
either.
that's not what I want to do.
You can check out the
what do I-
participants. It should say, if you see the list of participants, you can
No,
hover
I-
over Jules and give the
I
rights.
don't have a list of participants. Let me look. Breakout rooms, reactions.
Down the bottom of
No.
the screen, you should see.
Yeah, I see breakout rooms, reactions, pause, stop recording, share, chat, participants. You want to go?
Exactly.
Oh, participants. Okay, here we go. Now, all right, and now,
If you hover over Jules, you should be able to give her the rights by the right click, I guess.
okay, mute more. Make host,
Yes.
Okay.
change host.
Yes.
Got it. That's the first time I've run into
Yeah.
that.
Zoom is really determined to give us all heart attacks at some point.
Are you good? Are you
I wait.
back?
We nobody moved, so I hit the button. Okay. Do you want to stop the cloud recording? Yes.